Hello folks, this is Tennyson E Stead, writer and director of Quantum Theory and founding member of 8-Sided Films, coming to you today to talk about, in a general sense, planning ahead, and in a more specific sense about the surprises that people are just floored by in the filmmaking process. And far and away, the sort of biggest surprise that hits first-time directors, first-time producers, and even experienced people who are finding themselves in new kinds of productions or new levels of production is just the sheer amount of workload that floods in when things start going right in any way. Whether it's that you've just gotten financing for the first time on your production and things are starting to turn and you're going from development into pre-production and towards production, or whether it's any number of different things, whether it's the distribution cycle where you're showing up at the festivals and all of a sudden you're either signing a distribution deal or you're getting yourself into a situation directly with movie theaters where you now have a date where your project opens. And now you're looking at how full the theaters are at the festivals and realizing that those numbers aren't going to cut it, and you need to find a way to pack a house much more completely, and there's a date at which you can't anymore do that work. And all too often, what ends up happening in these situations is that professionals wind up feeling overwhelmed, and they pass the blame to someone else. They look at these problems as insurmountable. They tell themselves that someone else is going to step in and do this work because no one told them it was coming, and it's too surprising for them to handle alone, and then it never gets done, and they find someone else to blame. And the really frustrating part about Hollywood is that all too often the system actually supports those conclusions because nobody wants to be wrong under those circumstances and nobody wants to be at fault. So everyone sort of builds this plausible deniability into the day when they are either producing or directing, and they find themselves in that same position because they're going to want to be able to blame someone else too. That's not how show people take accountability for their work. And it's not what I was taught in theater. And it does not fly in a stage environment because everyone is responsible for how full the house is, and everyone, especially in a repertory company, everybody's responsible for the size and the scope and the responsiveness of your audience. So the alternative perspective and the way that I strive to live my life and to run this company and indeed the people I surround myself with, all ascribe to the value of, to the fullest degree possible, first of all, anticipating those crunches. There's absolutely no question that when we finish the development process on Quantum Theory and we make the transition into production, that it is going to be a tidal wave of overwhelming force in terms of the number of decisions that need to get made per day, the amount of information it's going to take to make those decisions, and the resources that have to get moved from place to place to make sure those decisions can actually be implemented and enforced. It's going to be a mess, and we're not going to have a lot of resources. We're going to be a very small production climbing up a very large mountain. We're going to have conflicting schedules because people aren't going to be paid as much as they would be on another film, which means they're not going to be able to turn down work in other places, which means we're not going to have all the support we might need when exactly we need it. So there's going to have to be ways of filling in those gaps and making sure that work still gets done. We're going to need stopgap measures in place on a day-by-day basis when the person we need isn't available, what I'm saying is you have to understand that these problems are coming in advance. You have to build systems for handling them, protocols, whether that means having the flexibility to move things around, bounce the schedule around a little bit without costing the production too much money and never making commitments that make that impossible. Making sure that your production is a production that can be flexible in that regard so that you can bring people back together during those moments when everybody needs to be together and go and do the work that you can do on your own in between right? Or alternatively, you have got to make sure that there's backup resources to come in and take care of business, when resources are short and when all of a sudden everything that needs to be there isn't. And on top of that, you've also got to make sure that every person that makes a specific commitment to you that you're counting on is a person who can keep that commitment. You can't be doing business with people that are in any way, shape, or form unreliable when it comes to delivering on their word, because when you're dealing with a smaller budget and a larger challenge, people's word is all you have to go on. That is the foundation that you're building that show on, is your trust in one another. So the hope that any of these things, if for example, if you have experience with someone and you really want them to be successful and you really want them to be trustworthy, but they haven't been in the past, or if they're a good person but they're just not reliable, if they're not Johnny on the spot every time they need to be, and giving their best work regardless of the resources, so that you can turn around and use the resources you have to support them in that endeavor and give them the opportunity to do their best work, even though somebody else might not be so able to take advantage of the limited resources you have. That's the person you want. The person you can't afford is the person who is not 100% not just sure that they can do that, but who does not have the 100% track record of doing that with you. You can't afford that person. You've got to control all of these little variables all the way along, all the way through the process, knowing that those variables, when you really, hit your stride and things start happening, are going to be tested as hard as as you can imagine them being tested, and additional challenges, like, for example, the brain damage, and my experience as a disabled person, all of the problems that come up with my disability, I have to assume are going to be a problem and a threat to our success on set. I have to assume that, because things are going to be moving so fast that if one of those things is a threat and it's not handled immediately, then the problems that come from that issue and that kink in the hose are going to spread all the way down our schedule. They're going to add costs, that keep popping up over the course of the entire production and post-production process. The mistakes that get made because somebody wasn't there to make the decision that needed to get made exactly when it needed to be made, the mistakes that are made as a result of that are going to pop, all the way down the process. And either you'll wind up with a worse movie, or you'll wind up with major budget and timing problems, or probably both. And you've got to look at every little thing that can go wrong as something that probably will go wrong when the systems are tested, when things get busy and hot. And that's always the case in production. There is no production that is not a mad scramble for the finish line. There is not such a production. It doesn't exist. They're all that way. No matter how much money you have, no matter how comfortable you feel, everyone is under the gun and everyone is stressed out, and it's about how people support each other. And the first thing you have to do in supporting other people is make sure your stuff is handled, your problems are handled. So, do not be surprised by the crunch, is what I'm saying. Anticipate that there are going to be moments where things get much, much, much busier and much, much, much crazier, where there's more deadlines and more conflicts and more problems than you signed up for. Anticipate that every day and make sure that the things that you have to get done to address those problems when they come up are done now, so that when those problems arise, you're not trying to do the thing you should have been doing now. Clear the decks so that you can launch the plane. That's what I'm saying with this blog. It's vitally important that a filmmaker anticipates that life is going to become overwhelming and without warning. And you've got to be healthy, you've got to be rested, you've got to be prepared, you've got to be in control of the systems that you're going to need to resolve those problems. So put yourself in control now. And with that, I'm going to sign off. Thank you for hearing me out. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.